All right. Hey, y'all lean in. I want to tell you a story. Several years ago, I worked for a fairly large, predominantly white church, and I was the first person of color that they had ever hired. Now, for a little while, this actually was a pretty good thing. They had empowered me to do a lot of different things, both inside and outside in the community. I got to be a part of creating a multicultural church collaboration of 7 churches with different ethnicities. We worked together in the local community. We adopted schools together. We created pathways of communication across racial lines and cultural lines and denominational lines. We did racial reconciliation work in Rwanda. It was a holy moment, y'all. And then 2020 hit. And all of a sudden, that racial reckoning of America. And the conversations that we were having about race got real fast. And the people that had empowered me to lead because of political fear and fear around wokeness and CRT, they started to pull back and push back. They started to police my posts. They started to pull me from the pulpits, and they put me in meetings of disciplinary action with my elders. I remember 2 particular elder meetings. The first one, I was brought in. I was sitting in front of these 7 white elders, average age of 60, these men. And I remember at the end of the meeting, one of them turned to me and said, "Marcus, I'm not even sure slavery is still a sin." Several meetings later, I was sitting there in front of these elders again, and I was mad. I was weeping. I was alone. And I remember saying to my white brothers, I said to them, "You are white supremacists." A couple months after that, I was effectively launched into ministry outside of the church. No salary, no support, no plan. I jumped into this reconciliation work that I get to do now, and I was flat broke and soul bruised. You see, I just started to chalk it up. I was like, that's how white people do black folk in the church. That's how that works. And then as I started to evaluate myself and to look inside to see what I carried with me, and with the help of a therapist, I found out that I had been experiencing complex PTSD. I don't know if you're familiar with complex PTSD. PTSD is kind of these singular traumatic events, but with complex PTSD, it's a little more complex, right? You've got this series and prolonged, systemic, random, very traumatic events that happen to you over the course of a long period of time. And for me, growing up in a predominantly white space, I experienced dozens and dozens of racially traumatic events that were enacted upon me by my white friends, neighbors, administrators, church members, and yes, church leaders. And I saw the world through this trauma. The way I saw the world, I saw it through this deal. I saw a conflict through this trauma. I saw relationships through this trauma. I saw feedback through this trauma. And I find myself leading out of this trauma. Now, I wanted to ignore it, right? But the problem with trauma is it doesn't stay in the background. It'll start to lead if you don't heal it. So I needed to go down the journey of healing it. Because good leadership is healed leadership. Now, as I was thinking about what happened to me in that elder room, and I was thinking about this diagnosis, I started to think, man, where does this trauma come from? And I started to think about the way we describe racial groups in America, right? African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Italian American. There's that hyphen there, right? It's small, but it carries a lot of weight. Right? On the front end, it's about culture and heritage and story. It's the beautiful things that God has dumped into cultures, right? It's the rhythm of Africa. It's the storytelling of Latin America. It's the resilience of Asian America. It's the family of the Italians. This is what God designed in the cultural mandate. It's the thing, it's the glory that will return and come together to fully image God in the Revelation church. It's beautiful. This is what I call the pre-hyphen. But then there's the post-hyphen, the American side. And this is where everything gets really complicated for everyone. Because that's where the cultures gets meshed together and filtered through this filter of the ideology of whiteness. And this is where the trauma comes in. See, it's not our ethnic identities that created the trauma, it's what happened to our ethnicities that did that. I don't have this trauma because I'm African, I have this trauma because I'm African American. And this is not just us, this happens to everybody, my brown brothers, my white brothers and sisters. Look, we are all shaped by this post-hyphen traumatic story in America. And if we don't do something about this, we're gonna have some problems because you see, you can't skip past this post-hyphen trauma because you're going to miss the wounds that it created, and you can't heal what you don't name. And good leadership is healed leadership. And look, we're in the midst of this shift. We've been talking about it this whole week, right? There's this 25 years that is coming, and people of color are going to be in leadership roles in all places and sectors of society that they have never been in before, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. But wait, it's a fragile thing if we don't deal with this trauma. Because history has shown us what leadership looks like out of unhealed pain. We've seen some white leaders throughout history and even today that use power in the church, in society, and in politics to exclude, to erase, and to marginalize people who don't look like them. And that's not done out of hatred, right? It comes from a trauma place. There's this fear of losing control. This believing this lie of your supremacy. There's a discipleship notion that says that power is godliness and whiteness is rightness. And if we're not careful, as leaders of color, we will repeat this. Because trauma doesn't sit in the background. It will lead if you don't heal it. So people of color like myself, like when we lead, if we don't heal this, we will preach inclusion, but we'll practice control. We'll demand equity, but lead out of insecurity. We'll create diverse teams, but we'll silence dissenting voices because they don't sound like our pain. That is not leadership. That is reenactment. That is mirroring the very oppression that we are here trying to fight against. And so with leaders of color, it's not if you will lead, it's what kind of leaders will you be? So what do we do with this? This trauma. If we know that trauma sits and it leads if not taken care of, then healing trauma is not optional. It's not extra credit, it's not extracurricular, it's not soft, it's not a sentimental action. It is an act of spiritual warfare. You can't cast out what you're still clinging to. You can't reconcile what you won't name. And you can't guide and disciple people into wholeness while you are bleeding on them with your leadership. What we need is not more leaders with platforms. We need more leaders with scars. Those who have wrestled this trauma, wrestled with God, wrestled this healing into work until we walk away like Jacob with the limp because we are tired of pretending that we are strong enough. We need leaders who lament, who know how to sit in silence with others. Leaders who don't mistake charisma for character. And leaders who don't use their power as a weapon. This is a strong point that the church has to understand. And this is for me what sent me into my therapy journey, which is completely opposite of what my culture has told me to do. We don't go to therapy, we don't go to counseling, but I needed it. I needed to go towards this healing. I need to be on this journey. And let me be honest, it's probably going to continue because I'm not sure if we ever really fully heal. But what I needed to learn is I needed to learn how to cry again. I needed to learn how to take feedback from anybody. I needed to push through this powerlessness and this shame and this hypervigilance that I practiced every day. And I needed to allow myself to be loved and held and be known by my friends, my family, and my community. And I needed to be reminded that the kingdom of God is not built on unbroken people who are pretending to be saviors. So if you're a person of color on the rise who is going to be stewarding power, don't just seek power, but seek to heal deeply. So that when you get this power, you will know how to wield it rightly. And for my white brothers and sisters here who have been leaning in and listening and learning and repenting, this message is for you too. Although the pain is different, the invitation is the same. Because we all have trauma. We all steward power. And we have a responsibility in the next iteration of this movement to lead differently than what came before us. Because if we don't heal this pain and deal with this real level of trauma, the events of what happened to me in my elders meetings will continue to happen. Leaders will continue to trigger one another. Churches will continue to splinter. We will push each other away, not because we can't agree, because we don't know how to hold pain without passing it on. And it's important that we engage and understand that. You see, in this next era, This post-hyphen, power-shifting, Browning of America era, what we need is this. We need to let our wounds become our witness, not our weapons. Don't run from the call of woundedness or weakness, because God's power is made perfect in weakness. Our wounds, through Christ's wounds, is how we are truly healed. In other words, healing doesn't erase our scars, it reshapes them. It turns them into something that can carry weight, give life, and reflect God's power instead of our pain. So may we become leaders, the kind of leaders that heal differently. May we become the kind of leaders that not only look differently than came before, but we actually lead out of a different spirit. Healed, whole, and ready to lead. Because good leadership is healed leadership. Thank you.